Shannon's Lumber Industry Update.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. It is episode 128, and well, after a lot of requests on this, we are talking about wood toxicity today. That's the main topic. I've got a few other things to touch on, some great feedback I've gotten, a few other industry news and things like that. But wood toxicity, not just the dust, but the wood itself. Is it going to kill me? I don't know. We're going to find out what to look for, how it could represent, basically everything you wanted to know about wood toxicity. Kind of a morbid topic, but something that I think we need to be aware of. Little bit of feedback to you. This show is an audio podcast. It started as an audio podcast. I've recently started doing video. And when I started doing video, I thought I want this to be an audio podcast. Well, I think I've slipped a little on the last couple of episodes, and I've been really keen on using visuals and showing different websites and things like that on the video. And I want to make sure that this podcast certainly can be watched on YouTube, but is also still listenable. I myself consume, well, all of my podcasts while driving in the car. And I got some feedback. Quite a few people emailed me directly. I had some feedback on YouTube, had some feedback on Patreon that I think I've been leaning into the video too much. And I want to apologize because it was never my intention. My roots in podcasting started more than 15 years ago when podcasts were just audio, like the first generation of podcasts. Then they went to video. Now audio is back, and now videos kind of come back, but as an add-on to audio. And I always told myself that I wanted to make sure that I stayed true to the audio podcasting side of things. So while there is a video component of this that is found on my Renaissance WW YouTube channel under the Lumber Update playlist, and you can watch that if you want. If you consume your podcast via video, certainly there'll be some visuals from time to time, but I really want to make sure this stays as an audio podcast. So to those of you who sent me emails, those of you who commented publicly, seriously, thank you. And if you find me kind of slipping and the audio is no longer audio and I'm making too many references to video, well then, call me on it. I definitely want to hear that. I want to make this show better. And I want this at heart to be an audio podcast. If I run across sections where I need to do more video, maybe I'll make that like a supplemental episode and try to do my best to still have an audio version of it. So enough of that. I really kind of took that feedback to heart because it's something that I really wanted to make sure I didn't do. So enough of that. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen, watch, and support this show. Your questions are integral to keeping this show going. Your support is integral to keeping this show going. So if you like what you're listening to or watching, please consider sponsoring the show. If you go to patreon.com/lumberupdate, you can become a sponsor. I send out informational wood species stickers every single month for all of my walnut tier subscribers. But if you just want to throw $1, that's cool. I greatly appreciate you. But more than anything, you can support the show by submitting your questions, submitting your feedback, submitting industry news stuff. If I can sculpt the script, if you will, not that there's any script to this, of my show around the stuff that you sent me, it makes it just that much better. I love your perspectives and your feedback from all different walks of life. So with that being said, let me grab something here. We recently featured hemlock as a featured species, and Willem wrote in and he said, a few years back, when I was living in New York City, I made a simple Moravian stool with 2x lumber from my local hardware store. I tried an iron acetate finish on it. The legs, which were pine, didn't change color at all. The seat, which was hemlock, became a gunmetal gray in a matter of minutes. This all led down a rabbit hole to learn that New York State had incredible old-growth forests of eastern hemlock that were logged for their tannic bark to support that growing industry in New York State and New York City. I can imagine all the line shaft-driven machines running an old-growth hemlock tanned leather. Cheers to your podcast. Thanks very much. Willem, that's awesome. And it kind of plays nicely into what we're talking about today. There's a high amount of tannin in the bark of hemlock. You won't find that much tannins or their various metabolites in the wood itself, but there will certainly be traces. And in many instances, that can actually attribute to some of the smell that many people can associate with freshly sawn hemlock. But for the most part, those extractives, the tannins they use for the tannic acid was in the bark itself. And that actually can be toxic. That is a particularly sensitizing and irritating toxin, tannic acid and tannins in wood. But in this case, only in the bark. Excellent feedback, timely, considering we just talked about hemlock. Chad sent me this. I don't know if this is feedback or news or whatever, but Chad says, I live near the Morton Arboretum in suburban Chicago. This weekend, I attended their first ever wood slab sale, and he sent a link. I could put the link in the show notes, but honestly, this slab sale has long passed. But the point of this is typical. I did a little bit of digging around the various arboretums, and this is common. Also, like the urban tree instances, there's several here in Baltimore where the different counties will pull trees down, saw them into boards, and have like a once a week, once a month, once a year type sale. These arboretums, however, really have incredible specimens of trees that, have been really well cared for. They're going to have not a whole lot of, I don't want to say defects, but they're going to be healthy trees, in other words. And you're going to be able to get opportunities to catch some crazy species you're not going to get commercially. So let's see. Chad actually said that they had a ticket sale strategy that seemed designed to discourage casual browsers. Tickets were on sale for $100, but 100% of the ticket price, essentially that's your cover charge to get in, 100% of the ticket price could be applied to your purchase. So basically you paid the cover at the door and they had slabs marked individually for price, and you found a $200 slab, you only paid $100 because you could credit your $100 entry fee. And I've actually seen, I came up with 3 different instances of arboretums doing the same thing. This is whether the Morton Arboretum came up with this first and everybody copied it, or vice versa. This seems to be a kind of standard thing. In fact, I'm working on brewing something at my day job at J. Gibson McIlvain, where we have some material that is no longer in inventory and we need to move, and we're going to do some sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Copay. I keep wanting to say copay. Can you tell how much I frequent bars? Cover charge. I've reached the age where I think copay before I think cover charge now. Welcome to my late 40s. Anyway, there would be a cover charge at the gate, and basically, if you can fill your pickup truck, you're on your way out. Stay tuned for that, folks. That's a really early tease. We're probably talking 3 or 4 months away, but we will not be the first lumberyard to do that. And I wanted to bring this up because if you have an arboretum in your area, look it up. Give them a call. Ask if they ever do a sale for the trees that have come down, anything that has been sawn, or for that matter, are they sawing any of the trees that come down into boards? Could be a really great resource for not only relatively inexpensive wood, I don't know, who knows how they're pricing it, but more importantly, species that you really wouldn't have a lot of access to on the commercial market. Next is some feedback from Rob, and this goes back a while to when I was talking about that tree that fell on those people's house in Portland, Oregon, and how they were trying to remove it, and the city wouldn't let them remove it. It was a terrible story. Rob says, your discussion on this prompted me to look at my town's regulations. He lives in the San Francisco area, Marin County, California. Is it Marin or Marin? I think it's Marin County, isn't it? Let's see. He says, I found a surprising wrinkle. While I wasn't surprised to see they have several categories of protected trees, they also have undesirable trees that we apparently aren't allowed to plant without special permission. An undesirable tree means a blue gum eucalyptus, Monterey pine, Monterey cypress, coast redwood, or any other species of tree, regardless of height or circumference, that generally goes more than 3 feet per year in height and is capable of reaching a height of over 35 feet at maturity. I'm guessing it has to do with preserving precious views of San Francisco, but it's hard not to chuckle considering almost all the trees in my neighborhood are in fact Monterey pine, eucalyptus, and redwoods, all of which are on the don't plant list. Not sure if it's just my town's legendary unfriendliness to development or if other people have run into similar restrictions, but I wanted to share this data point. It's not unusual for there to be lists of invasive species and then, do not plant these species. The tree of life is one that comes up a lot. Polonia, I featured on this show before, as an invasive species and often prohibited to plant. Black locust is illegal to plant in like 36 states in the U.S. It is particularly funny that the Monterey cypress and Monterey pine that is native to Coastal California is now don't plant it anymore, because the tree does grow like a weed. That's also why the tree of life is on that, verboten list. I wouldn't be surprised to see this type of thing pop up with other species. Buckeye is the Ohio state tree, but I know it's become invasive in other states. I wouldn't be surprised if that tree was on that list as well. It's a fast growing tree that frankly doesn't have a lot of downstream use for it. So it ends up, whatever the regulation driving it, whether there's no use for it or whether it's invasive or it grows too fast or it's ugly or whatever. In Rob's case, it blocks the skyline views of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Transamerica building, the pointy shaped one. Anyway, yeah, it'd be really interesting. Anybody else finds interesting wrinkles in their local ordinances? I would love to hear about it. Please let me know. So I wanted to touch a little bit on some industry news here. Ethan sent me an article from the Wall Street Journal that basically says the housing market is in full boom. Like, it's home building season, but no one's buying houses, and the lumber market is falling at the same time. So he said, do you anticipate this fall in the lumber market having any effect on the hardwood lumber market? And if you go back to my episodes during and after COVID, when I talked about just the crazy lumber market, anytime we talk about the lumber market, we're talking about the softwood futures market. Is that right? I just added futures. I don't know if that's correct. I'm not a stockbroker. We're talking about the softwood market. That's the commodity trading thing. 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x10s, construction lumber. That's what's being tracked by that. And it has really absolutely nothing to do with the hardwood market. Hardwoods are specialty woods, very different uses, and really are not consistently sold in any volume that you would really make a blip on a commodities market like softwood. But we can't deny the fact that if the lumber market is down and fewer people are building with softwoods, there's a strong chance that where the hardwoods in that home, maybe the hardwood flooring, maybe paneling, maybe hardwood cladding, moldings, poplar's a hardwood. A lot of solid wood moldings are made out of poplar. All the stuff that goes on inside the house, well, if they're not building homes, then probably that market will fall as well. But the reason that this won't really affect the hardwood market is the hardwood market is all about a series of niches, and those niches are driven by specific species. I've talked about the white oak craziness that's going on right now. Well, white oak, it's like totally in the design zeitgeist right now. I was at the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in New York City about a month ago, and everything was in white oak. It was all white oak and all rift white oak, of course. But at the same time, you've got micro distilleries and wineries and breweries that are requiring white oak for barrels in order to make their whiskey, in order to make their wine. And that's drawn a huge amount of white oak off the market. The flooring market is still going up, even though there's not homes being built, there's remodeling going on. And one of the most common flooring species is white oak. So white oak could take a nosedive. Like, white oak used to be big in furniture. Think of like the arts and crafts period in the early 1900s up to like 1920s. White oak was huge. Well, the furniture market has pretty much died. It's gone offshore in North America, and there's no white oak being bought for furniture anymore. And that took a huge dip in the market. But these other niches have spun up to create a massive market for white oak. Cherry is absolutely in the dumpster right now. And if you are a mill that specializes in cherry, you're hurting. So what do? You stop sawing cherry and you find another species. Maple is always going. Maple is a common vanilla wood that is used for just about everything. So you can get some maple, relatively useful, and you can sell it as more of a utility product. You can get into more poplar and do more moldings. Or you can find some white oak, or you can find some walnut, because both of those species are super hot right now. And being able to pivot and change the species can change who your customer is in the market that you're selling to. Whereas the softwood market, it's kind of all the same customer. You will see some specialties Like clear vertical grain hemlock, it's a softwood, but CVG hemlock you'll find will often be sold like a hardwood because it's tackling a niche market. And that's the one thing that constantly insulates and protects hardwood lumber industry from the swings in the stock market that the softwood industry or the construction lumber industry is particularly prone to being hammered by. That's why I'm glad I work in a hardwood lumber mill. This one was interesting. Jay sent this article in saying that a mast year. Now, sorry, let me clarify this. Many trees, let's just talk with oak. Usually when we talk about a mast year, we're talking about oaks. Seeds, in the case of an oak, an acorn, are not produced uniformly from year to year. Certainly the weather can play a huge amount on how many acorns are produced, but in general, acorns tend to have a year or two, like I think it's every 2 to 5 years, where they produce an enormous amount of acorns. And that's been referred to as a mast year. A mast year can be a generic term for any species that produces a lot of seeds or a lot of fruit over like a larger scale. Instead of just being every year, they produce very little one year, and every maybe 5 years, they have just this bounty crop or there's a huge amount of seeds. That's known as a mast year. Well, Jay sent me this article saying that in the maples in the Northeast, there are an amazing number of maple seedlings everywhere. And this was on like a gardening forum. People kept finding these, quote, weeds that are actually sugar maples. And there is a mast year in New England on maples right now, producing a huge number of seeds. And, they're being propagated on the wind and all various other ways that seeds are propagated, mostly on the wind with maple. And they're sprouting up everywhere. This article goes on to posit that this could actually be a very good thing with many people who are keeping those and letting those trees grow up naturally and helping to repopulate the urban canopy from all those maples. For every 3 maples they pull out, there's 6 more seedlings coming up somewhere else that are actually surviving. And once people realize it's not a weed and it grows large enough to be a sapling into a tree, many people are actually keeping those maples. So it's Mother Nature's way of saying, the population is threatened. Let's produce a whole lot of seeds in order to reproduce a lot more. Or it's being threatened by a specific predator. So they're, blowing out a bunch of seeds to try to replenish the supply, replenish all their little children. At the same time, they spend so much effort producing seeds that the next year there's very few seeds or very few acorns, very few fruits, whatever it is, and could be that way for several years, which is why mast years, at least in oaks, are like every 5 years. You get a mast year and there are freaking acorns everywhere and fat squirrels all over the place. So interesting to see how that mast year is affecting the urban canopy. But really interesting is 10, 12, 15 years from now, what does the urban canopy look like? Specifically, how many maples are in the canopy in the New England region? So cool article, Jay. Thanks for sending that. I kind of love it when we get to go off on these somewhat naturalist topics. This is certainly a lumber podcast, but you got to understand trees in order to understand where they come from in order to understand lumber. Let's move on to the main topic here. This is from my good friend and former guest on the show, Tommaso. He says, can we talk about the toxicity of woods? I was taught that woods like walnut and cherry were not ideal for food containers, like cups, plates, etc., due to the toxins in them leaching into the food. They're fine for incidental content, like cutting boards, though. And we all know about the toxicity in regards to wood dust. Anyone who's ever sanded cocoa below without a respirator knows what I'm talking about. And of course, the general dangers of dust. But what about direct contact? There's an old tale about making a spoon out of poison ivy just for one's mother-in-law to use so she wouldn't visit as often. So how do we know what wood is safe before we lick it? For those of you watching the video, I've just pulled up my favorite website, the Wood Database. For those of you listening, don't worry. The Wood Database is kind of my source for a lot of things, and they have an article on toxicity, but more importantly, they have a really handy chart with a whole bunch of species and what possible reactions, where they're affected. Is it the eyes? Is it the skin? Is it the respiratory system? And kind of how potent, with a series of 1 to 4 stars, how potent they can be. The important part is if you Google something like wood toxicity, you'll find any number of charts. A lot of people actually do cite Eric Meyer and the wood database, but I've seen several other charts on, what is that website? Which, by the way, if you ever can't find a wood species on the wood database, here it is. Tropicaltimber.info. That's a great one. If you can't find a species in the wood database, a lot of times it's on tropicaltimber.info, and it's similar. It's not as comprehensive or really as good as the wood database, but it will give you some information like Janko hardness, technical properties, things like that of really weird woods that you've never heard of, like bishop wood, sneeze wood, things like that. Although I think sneeze wood is on wood database. But regardless, oftentimes these tropicaltimber.info will have another chart of wood toxicity. I've seen some in dermatological scholarly journals where they actually get into like what are the toxins, what are the chemicals that are causing problems. The important part with any of this, with having a chart or something like that, is recognizing that wood toxins are going to be highly, not the toxins aren't variable. Your reaction to those toxins are highly variable from one individual to another and from one person's exposure to another. You'll hear the term sensitizer. This wood is a sensitizer. Sensitizer is a cumulative effect that the first time you use it, you may not notice any symptoms, but the more you use it, it's cumulative and it builds up and you get to the point where you can't even use that wood at all. I remember the founder of Bridge City Toolworks, John Economaki, had this issue. He had a wood dust sensitivity that built up and built up and built up to the point where he couldn't work wood at all anymore. It was really quite sad. So these charts are out there that give you kind of a quick reference as to what this wood may present in such symptoms. But not every wood's going to be captured. And just because a wood is not listed doesn't mean, it's perfectly safe. So you do need to do a little bit of research, and you're not really going to find like one, panacea resource that's going to list everything. A lot of times it's very experiential, and these lists, these charts will often show things that I look at and go, how is that toxic? I work with that all the time. I've never had a problem, and for years, decades, I've worked with that wood. So it's not like it's taken a while for the sensitivity to build up. It just doesn't affect me. Whereas other people I know are like, cannot handle white oak at all. White oak, I love it. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. For me, Western red cedar really gets to me, but it doesn't bother other people. My yard foreman can't even look at Iroko without breaking out in hives. I work with Iroko all the time and never had a problem. So certainly the charts are driven by other people's experience, and your experience may vary. I don't want to say take it with a grain of salt, because there's no question that these compounds are toxic to some extent, and you need to be aware of it. And if you're building things for other people, it's not just you, how you're reacting to it, but how they may run into it. So the important part is wood is generally only toxic when it's being cut or processed or machined of some sort. The dust certainly is an issue. The particles that it releases when you're turning into dust are the real things that can be harmful if inhaled. And that's really, wood dust is certainly carcinogenic. If you look up the material safety data sheet for wood dust, there is one MSDS for wood, because basically all wood dust is bad. Wear a respirator, try to keep it out of your lungs. It's more the tiny particulates causing problems than actually what's in the wood itself. But you can imagine if you aerosolate something that does have toxins in it and you're breathing it in, you're just getting it right into your system, and that can cause problems. Or if you get it on your hand and you rub your eye, you're putting it into your body. So certainly there are going to be woods that are going to affect your respiratory system. As you breathe them into your lungs, they will affect your lungs. If you get them in your eyes, you get the dust in your eyes, that causes a problem. If you get the dust on your skin, that causes a problem. But it is the breaking it down, creating the dust, the actual breaking apart of the fibers and that dust on your skin, which is causing the problem. Whereas if you took a block of sapele and I stuck that on my arm, it's not going to cause a reaction. But if I finely ground up that sapele into dust and sprinkled over my arm and left it there, it would be an irritant. Sapele can be an irritant to your skin if the dust is allowed to get there, because essentially you're freeing all those compounds, breaking them apart. Anytime you mill a board and you see, oh, that's a different color than like if I set it in the sun for 30 minutes, that oxidization is breaking down those chemicals, those toxins. When you freshly mill the board, that lighter color or sometimes variegated color is those fresh toxins that you've just exposed. So you can imagine if you take that wood and you ground it into fine dust and spread it over your skin, you're going to get a reaction. You're spreading out, almost increasing the potency of those toxins. So while we're breathing it in the dust, like the most benign dust is going to bother you just because of the small nature of the particulates in your lungs. But if there's already, nasty compounds in that fine particulate, that's really where things get to be a problem. So some woods like oak, which is really high in tannins and their metabolites, various tannic acids and things. Beech, that's got a saponin and some other polyphenolics in it. Those are definitely known to be human carcinogens. Oak is something you might be concerned about. It probably won't bother you if you're working with it in the shop, but if you inhale enough of the dust, that could really be a sensitizer, could build up and, in worst case, cause things like cancer. Things like birch, mahogany, teak, walnut, those all have a lot of toxins that in dust form could be a problem. Burning wood, certainly same type of thing. You're altering it. You're essentially combusting a lot of compounds and aerosolating them. Is that a word? Aerosolate? It sounds like a word. We're going to go with that. The other thing is with heat, you could be creating chemical reactions, creating things like benzene and formaldehyde with just, a relatively benign wood. So just touching the wood rarely does anything. Certainly, though, there are some species that are toxic to that extreme. Touch the board itself and you get a reaction. These are rare, but they're out there. So, like I said, certainly I don't want to brush over wood dust. Wood dust is a real problem. For most woodworkers, that's our biggest problem, especially from a sensitizer perspective that's building up and building up. Wear a respirator, use dust collection, use an air filter in your shop. That's the important part, because the other thing is, if there are toxins, if that wood does have an elevated toxicity level, it's in the dust. So if you're capturing the dust at your source, if you're preventing the dust from getting to you by wearing a respirator, if you're cleaning the dust out of the air with an air filter, those toxins are just not making it to your skin or to your eyes or to your lungs. Very, very important to control the dust. Let's talk about maybe symptoms, but what are the things, how will it be a problem? So really there's kind of four main categories of things that can bite you with wood toxicity. Irritants. This is very common. If you look at any of those charts, like the one on Wood Database, you'll find just about every wood on there is listed as an irritant. And is that an irritant to your skin, irritant to your eye, irritant to your respiratory system? These irritants are chemical substances in the wood that irritate exposed areas of the body on some people. Common reactions to irritants are sneezing, coughing, breathing problems, and skin rashes, which can occur almost immediately. The severity is proportional to just how much you've been exposed to. Was it just a passing breeze, or did you roll around in the pile of sawdust? The symptoms, however, are temporary. Wash that off, and you're good. Here's the problem with breathing it in, though, is it can take a long time to get those, micron-sized particles out of your lungs. All the more reason to wear a respirator and protect your lungs. But for skin irritations, eye irritations, flush your eye, take a shower, wash the dust off. It will go away. Sensitizers are chemical substances in the wood that can, after repeated exposure, cause the development of allergic reaction in some people. The risk depends not just on the wood itself, but the level and frequency of exposure, certainly as well as your sensitivity to that. Sensitizers are more serious than irritants because of the time delay. So, I'll give you an example. Like most kids, my dad put me in charge of cutting the grass, especially the youngest of three. I was the one, he gave it to my oldest brother. He said, no, let my middle brother do it. My middle brother's like, no, let Shannon do it. So I ended up cutting our yard for, a decade. And then when I grew up and got out of college and bought my own house, I cut the yard for another decade. Sometime like in 2008, I was getting sick. Like I'd get a stuffy nose, then I would start getting migraine headaches, and I would be ill. Sometimes I would even get a small fever for several days after I cut my grass. I finally put two and two together and realized the catalyst was cutting the grass. I went to an allergist and got tested, and yeah, I have an allergy to grass. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I've been cutting the grass for decades. And he's like, well, it's what we call a sensitizer. It took a while to build up in my system to the point where now, like if I'm driving down the road and my neighbors are cutting the grass and my windows are open, I will feel it. Like it'll be temporary because again, the level and frequency of exposure, but just a little bit of whiff of fresh cut grass will a lot of times give me a headache, certainly give me a stuffy nose. That took a while to build up. Had my brothers not made me cut the grass all those times when I was young, I might still be okay to cut my grass. But you know what? It's 97 degrees outside right now, so I'm perfectly happy not to be cutting my grass right now. Those are sensitizers. Over time, they can lead to much more serious things, rhinitis and even to carcinogenic type responses and things. The most common wood-related health problem is allergic reactions of the skin, that contact dermatitis. And here's where things get difficult, that delayed onset. So you may be fine. You may be like me and not really experience anything with walnut. Walnut's my favorite wood. I work with it all the time. Never had a problem with it. Well, say 10 years from now, I'm suddenly getting sick. I'm suddenly getting a rash. Well, all these years I've worked with walnut, I'm immediately excusing walnut. Well, it's not walnut. I've worked with it for years. It actually could be walnut that's causing the problem. Due to my prolonged multi-decade exposure to walnut, I have developed an allergy to it. And walnut is a sensitizer. Euglins, the chemical that gets its genus, Euglins nigra, black walnut. That same chemical that makes people say don't use walnut shavings in your horse barn or in your guinea pig cage because it will kill them. Certain animals are much more susceptible to humans, but it's also a lot of the same chemical that causes walnut allergies. For that matter, any nut wood is probably something to be concerned about. That's something that, you don't know. Again, all the more reason to protect yourself against the dust because, when you're inhaling the dust, it's going straight in your lungs. You're bringing it right into your body. That susceptibility, that sensitizer will ramp up a lot faster that way. Now, moving down the chain into the more nasty stuff, we have irritants, sensitizers, more nasty than that, toxic. Woods that are toxic have lethal substance found in them. The potential hazards are usually limited in situations where as you use it, you're exposed to a lot of accumulation, a whole lot of that toxin. A small amount of wood dust, there'll be toxin in it, but it'll be a small amount and maybe you get an upset stomach. But if you get a whole lot of it, you could really get sick and die. Like irritants, this can be a hazard for a person not only machining and creating dust, but also the person using a wood object like a salad bowl or a musical instrument. Just touching that salad bowl or a wooden spoon to your mouth or playing a guitar from one of these toxic woods will cause, contact dermatitis almost immediately. Then the really bad stuff, carcinogens. Long-term exposure to wood dust certainly could cause cancer. Nasopharyngeal cancer is one that comes to mind, which develops in full-time woodworkers after several decades of steady, unprotected contact with fine wood dust. If you ever read Bill Pence's wood site, The Clearview Cyclone Guy, it will freak you out. Like you will be jumping at shadows when it comes to wood dust. The key here is long-term exposure, unprotected exposure to wood dust. That's not to say there are not woods out there that are carcinogenic without long-term exposure, but in general, these are woods that are not really on the market and they have giant warning labels on them already. But woods with higher levels of carcinogens in them, like tannins, oak, tannic acid, the wood dust in there will probably skip over the headache and go straight to cancer. So these are the ones that you got to be really concerned about. And for the most part, those are documented on the various and sundry charts that you can find online. The carcinogens are the really, really scary ones. Here again, proper dust protection. You'll be okay. So those are the things that cause problems and the various chemicals that present as irritants and sensitizers and toxic and carcinogenic. What are some precautions to take? Let your wood oxidize. stick it in the sun for an hour or just leave it on your bench overnight. Generally, when you freshly mill a board, you want to let it rest for a little bit anyway to acclimate and get any kind of movement out of its system. But you'll also notice, especially if when you mill a wood, it has a strong scent to it, but you come back the next day and that scent is gone. That's what's happening as it oxidizes, as it acclimates, as the sun beats on it. The UV comes down and those chromophores actually break apart those long chain carbon compounds, those toxins, and bond with them and send them into something else. That's what causes that kind of mellowing of the color in the sun or the slight darkening of something like cherry in the sun. But the same thing happens with its exposure to oxygen. It's sweeping away a lot of those toxins. And if you are particularly susceptible to a wood or just, say, asthmatic to begin with, milling your wood, wearing a respirator, walking away and letting the wood sit for 24 hours will really knock down some of the reactions to it. Another thing you do that speeds this process up is wiping down the wood with mineral spirits to kind of neutralize these compounds. I'm sure you've heard the idea that if you're working with a really oily wood and you want to glue it, wipe it down with mineral spirits to remove the oil and lets the glue bond a little bit better. What you're doing is you're wiping it down with mineral spirits is you're cleaning off those oily toxic substance that are right on the surface of the wood that you're getting on your hands, that you could potentially putting in your eyes if you scratch your eye or your nose. When you cut the wood with the oil right on the surface, those fine dust particles are coated in oil that you're breathing in or settling on your skin and causing problems. Wiping it down with mineral spirits or naphtha, I don't know if neutralize is the right word, but it removes those oils. So when you're touching and handling the wood, you're not getting those toxins right on your skin. Now, the oilier the wood, the faster the oil will come back. But even working with like super oily woods like rosewoods and teaks, I found that wiping down with mineral spirits gives me a good hour of working time before that oil you start to see it again, coming back up to the surface. So if you have a problem, maybe don't work with rosewoods or teaks to begin with, but say for whatever reason, gun to your head, you have to work with teak. Such a great wood to work with. This can be a great way. If you're mildly susceptible, wiping it down with some sort of solvent will dissolve those toxins and give you some working time with it. Use kiln-dried wood, if at all possible. I love air-dried wood as much as the next guy. I love working with green wood. But think of a typical green wood. I've got a piece of polony on my bench behind me that's green, and the whole shop smells wonderfully sweet. What I'm smelling, remember, all smells are particulate in nature. Think about that the next time you walk into a bathroom that somebody just blew up before you. That sweet smell that you're getting, those are particulates coming off the wood. Those are potential toxins that you're breathing in from the wood. The wetter the wood is, the more active, more fluid those compounds are, and they're coming off on your hand just with the sheer moisture on the surface. Air dried are going to be much less, but when you put it in a kiln, you're stabilizing the wood by baking out a lot of those compounds. Just the high heat is causing a breakdown of those chemical compounds, those toxins. Other things like steamed wood, it's leaching out those toxins. That's what's creating, like steamed walnut is not nearly as variegated in color. It's pulling out those toxins, that Juglans toxin that causes problems. Kiln drying wood eliminates a lot of that. For that matter, go one step further, work with thermally modified woods. All the toxins, all the compounds, all the hemicellulose is gone from the wood. Now, in this case, the wood is much more dusty, so wear a respirator. You've got more benign dust, but it's still small particulates that can cause respiratory issues. But certainly, the drier the wood, the less prevalence of toxins you will run into. They're not all gone, but you'll find that a lot of them are gone. Certainly, I've said wear a respirator about 100 times already. Cover up. Wear long sleeves. Wear gloves if necessary. If you're particularly sensitive to contact dermatitis, cover up your exposed skin. You find a lot of wood turners will, not only have the neck gaiter to keep shavings from going down their throat, but you can get wood shavings and dust on the back of your neck and everything, or on your arms, and that can cause real problems, especially because wood turners a lot of times will turn really exotic woods like cocobolo. That's really the only time I've worked with cocobolo is on the lathe. And that stuff is, coming off in large quantities and landing on your arm and coating your arm with dust. You may not be that sensitive to it, but when buried in dust, you could really get a problem. It's that frequency and amount of exposure. So just having something to protect your arms, certainly long sleeves around spinning machinery is a problem. Make sure you like Turner's jackets will have Velcro cuffs, so you don't have hanging stuff that could get caught in a machine. Be safe in that respect, but just covering up can be really beneficial there. What else? And I mentioned use thermally modified woods, but definitely wear a dust mask. Some of the things to look out for, symptoms, are skin reactions. I've said this. Allergic contact dermatitis, hives, blisters, and very itchy skin. Pay attention to that. And if you have it and you realize, I was just in the shop all day, think about what you were working with or how you were working with it. Respiratory problems, coughing, nosebleeds, runny nose, asthma, pneumonitis, bronchitis, and occupational asthma. I guess that's different than regular asthma. I don't know. Other symptoms, headaches, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, sore throat, and pink eye. I've experienced the headache thing, certainly with the grass story. I've experienced it with yellow cedar and western red cedar, where I worked with it all day. And the next day I had a terrible, terrible headache, like a sinus headache. And it might have been, the sinus pressure doing to the stuffy nose that produced the headache, but it would like run down the back of my neck and be like a tension headache. And I know now that if I'm using a cedar, really only yellow and western red is what I've worked with. I haven't worked with aromatic recently or any of the eastern whites, but probably cedar is something that I need to be very aware of. No contact issues, no skin rashes, all respiratory, which results in a headache for me. So something to be very aware of. So lots of different things. And one thing I discovered is if you really want to know, like you would be surprised if you go to Google and type, why is oak toxic? In fact, for those watching the video, let me do that. I already did it. So I went into my Google Chrome browser and I typed, why is oak toxic? Now I have an AI beta tool enabled on my Google Chrome, but essentially it's giving me an abstract of several different posts. But right away, this says oak trees contain tannic acid, which is thought to be the cause of oak toxicity. Oak is most dangerous in the spring when leaves and flower buds are opening, when acorns are available. When leaves mature and acorns ripen, they become less toxic. Oak toxicity can affect livestock, cattle, sheep, sometimes humans. Symptoms include constipation, diarrhea, bloody black sticky stool, loss of appetite. It sounds like a pharmaceutical commercial at that point. But the point is, if I'm going to just do this while I'm here in my browser, why is beech toxic? This plant contains saponins and polyphenolic compounds. Fagus grandiflora, a species native to North America, is much less toxic than the European variety Fagus sylvatica. The nuts contain the highest concentration of the toxin. And it can go on. This is quoting some things from dog websites, beech trees poisoning dogs, etc. So if you're like not really sure, just Googling why is insert species here toxic, you'd be surprised what Google will tell you. Because so much of this information is publicly available, and the information collated together into these charts that I talked about is coming from various medical journals and things like that. So just Googling your wood species will tell you a great deal there. But let's talk about some basic rules of thumb. Because the upshot to this whole thing is pretty much all wood is toxic. You guys remember that Saturday Night Live sketch called Happy Fun Ball? And it was a series of warnings. Phil Hartman at his finest. Rest in peace, Phil. And it was like, do not bounce, Happy Fun Ball. Do not taunt, Happy Fun Ball. Do not toss, Happy Fun Ball. It's like making fun of these pharmaceutical commercials that have all these different side effects. Wood is the same way. Do not taunt wood. Do not cut wood. Do not handle wood. Do not breathe wood. Do not look at wood. It's toxic. And really, dependent upon your sensitivity to certain chemical compounds, you could have a reaction to almost any wood. So let's get some rules of thumb. If it smells strongly, be cautious. Cedars, they really bother me. White oak has a really strong smell. Well, we've already said the tannins in white oak can be really a problem to a lot of people. It's not a problem for me. I love the smell of white oak, but it smells very strongly. I can tell the minute I come into work and they've been milling white oak. I can smell it from like a block away. I can smell yellow cedar from a mile away. Does the tree produce nuts? Walnuts, beech trees, pistachios. You look up all of these nut trees, you will find them on those lists. They tend to be very oily woods. They have toxins. There's a reason that there's so many nut allergies out there today. It's the toxins, the compounds, the oils in the trees that produce nuts, it's probably a red flag, especially if you're making things that will have food or eat food from. Nut allergies are very, very common because these toxins are particularly irritating. If the wood feels oily, be wary. Teak, rosewoods, good example. If the wood reacts to fasteners, like it starts to stain, reacting to ferrous fasteners, probably has a high tannin content. Oak is a big one of this one as well. If the wood is vividly colored, be wary. Purple heart. When you mill it, it is bright, bright purple. Guess what you're going to find on that list? Purple heart has dalbergione and neoflavonoid compounds in it, which cause irritants, but also are sensitizers. Cocobolo. When you freshly mill cocobolo, it's orange, it's green, it's purple, it's all over the place. Teak. When you freshly mill it, it's creamy, it's gray, it's yellow, it's green, it's really vibrantly colored. Dogwood. It's pink in color, but it's kind of mellow. Guess what's not on the chart? Dogwood. And I looked up dogwood. I actually typed, is dogwood toxic? No, it's not. So that's not, it's colored, it's pink, but it's not vibrantly colored. If it's really variegated in color, especially when freshly milled, it's probably an issue. I said if highly variable, if it's vividly colored, but also if it's highly variable in color right after milling, be aware. And then if you experience a reaction to a wood and you've narrowed it down and you said, oh, it was probably the walnut, look at the woods closely related to it. What's in the Euglens genus? Well, butternut is also in there. All the other strains of walnut, Euglens regia, the European walnut, Clara walnut, which is Euglens, I'm forgetting, crypto something? Whatever. If it's in the Euglens genus, and you have a reaction to Euglens nigra, there's a strongly suspect that you're going to have a reaction to its cousins. But if you really like walnut, look up Peruvian walnut, which is not in the Euglens genus. Hold on. Now I'm second guessing myself. The species is Neotropica. I think it is... Hang tight. You know what? I'm wrong. It is in the Euglens genus. It is Euglens neotropica. So that's one that might not be a good example for you. You need to look for other brown woods. And actually, the wood database is great for this. At the bottom of the wood database, it usually lists related woods or alternate woods. Those related woods, if you experience a reaction to it, there's a strong chance you're going to experience a reaction to those as well. So use what we've learned on this podcast about working properties. And I know sapele works a certain way. Utile is probably going to work similar because it's also in the Intangiofragma genus. Look within the family and you'll find the same working properties probably, but also the same toxins. And ultimately, if you are experiencing symptoms, take a step back. What have I been working? What species have I been working? How have I been working? Did I neglect to wear my respirator while I was doing that? Was I in a situation where I was letting the dust pool on the floor and I was kicking up the dust? Or I was seated doing something all day and I was letting the dust kind of pool on my arm? Think back, first of all, where is the symptom? Is it a rash on my arm? Where did I get wood in contact with that? And what was I working with? And well, stop doing that. It's kind of the obvious thing. Stop working with that wood, but stop working with it for a while and then introduce it back in and see if it's a problem again. But if it was a problem at one point due to I buried my arm in walnut sawdust, that could be a sensitizer for you. And if you continue to work with walnut for years and years and years, it could be a real problem that could build up. It doesn't mean you have to stop working walnut altogether, but you need to take extra precautions like we talked about before. Respirator, cover up exposed skin, make sure you're cleaning the dust out of your shop, etc. Wood dust and wood toxicity in general, something we need to all be aware of in working in the lumber industry. The reality is there are certainly some woods out there that are going to just be nasty. But most woods are going to be a problem if exposed to it enough, right? Everything in moderation. If you bury yourself in freshly sawn wood dust, you're probably going to have a reaction no matter how unsusceptible you are to any number of things. So I wanted to put this into practice, and I did have a question. Let me look at my notes here. From Tom. He says, I'd like to know more about Chechen, otherwise known as Caribbean rosewood. It's a beautiful wood, but there's a bunch of info on its toxicity. How many people has it actually killed? And is it considered a genocidal maniac like Putin? Or is it a minor offender? I think that's a different type of Chechen. But this is interesting. Chechen Caribbean rosewood, also known as black poison wood. There's a warning label right there. Big red flag. If poison's in the common name, might be something to look at. But what's interesting, Chechen, and if I look up Chechen in the wood database, I think I looked it up ahead of time. It is, so for those of you watching the video, I've just pulled it up on the website, but let me scroll down and look for the allergies and toxicity. Chechen, although severe reactions are quite uncommon, Chechen has been reported as a sensitizer. Usually most common reactions simply include eye and skin irritations, and it points to the chart of allergies and all that stuff for more information. So according to the wood database, and I did a little bit of digging, I did another is why is Chechen wood toxic? And I got the same thing. The wood itself is not that toxic, but what's really toxic is the sap. Sap affects people, but a key reminder to this, it's the bark and the cambium layer also should be considered. So things like contact dermatitis that comes from black poison wood is due to touching the bark itself and due to getting sap on your skin, not from the lumber. Certainly those chemicals came from somewhere in the wood, and there's going to be trace amounts of those chemicals in the wood itself, and that's probably what's causing some of the more uncommon dermatitis type things. But Chechen itself, I wouldn't actually rank it as that harmful of a wood. But here's the thing, folks. If you're working with live edge slabs, there's bark, there's cambium layer, there's sapwood in there. There's going to be higher concentrations of those toxins in the bark and those outer layers, the living part of the tree, that you may need to be aware of. And maybe you don't work with a live edge version of that particular wood. You cut that bark off and you work with the more tame heartwood in the middle, which is not going to have as many, or at least the level of potency, the level of concentration that you might find in the living parts of the tree. So good question, Tom. Perfect timing. They perfectly illustrate this in practice. And by the way, Chechen is listed in 3 of those charts that I looked up. So the show notes for this episode, I will certainly link to the wood database article on wood toxicity that has that chart in it. But like I said, a lot of that, you base it on your own experience. Unless you're working with highly, highly toxic woods, in which case you probably never heard of the wood before. You probably bought it from someplace far away. Run it against that wood database chart. It will probably be on there. If it's super toxic and carcinogenic, it's probably already on that chart. If it's not listed, that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily bad for you, but work with it and see what happens. And if you're having immediate reactions to it, it's an irritant. Sensitizers are going to creep up on you. Toxic reactions are going to be, pretty much immediate. If you find you're really irritated and then you take a shower and you're better, it's an irritant. And just go on a case by case situation. Certainly looking up the charts will allow you to be forewarned is forearmed. But if we've learned anything from this episode, is that wood is evil. Wood dust is especially evil, and just practice good practices in the shop when it comes to dust management. Any slightest reaction to wood, cover up, be prepared. It doesn't mean you have to stop working wood altogether, but be very cognizant of how much am I working with that wood, and could it cause potential problems over the next 2-3 decades if I continue to work with that wood. Thanks for the questions, guys. Thank you, Tommaso, for starting this whole thing. Thanks, Tom. I don't know if that's the same Tom or Tommaso. He sometimes just calls himself Tom. I don't know if it's the same person. If it is, hey, you got a double dose. But if anybody has any other information on wood toxicity or any other references that we should be aware of, please write in and let me know. If you go to lumberupdate.com, there's a form you can submit questions. You can also just email me at lumberupdate@gmail.com. You can hit me up on Instagram at lumberupdateshow and send me a direct message there as well. Always want to hear your questions. Always want to hear your feedback. Between now and then, go buy some wood. And then check it against the wood toxin chart and determine if you need to return it or not. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.